And we welcome you in, as always, to a Wednesday edition of Double Jab Boxing Podcast, powered by the Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame. As always, we welcome you into the TriX57.com studios, TriX57 Studios in the Playground Pier in Atlantic City. Rich Quinones alongside Rob Scott. We'll take you up to 8 o'clock straight up. A lot of boxing talk to get into. Had a great weekend in boxing. We've got what I believe is going to be a wonderful card as well with Thurman Garcia that we'll talk about Saturday, which, hey, not bad, right? You get a little free boxing on free TV on CBS. But first and foremost, Wilder and Washington, we saw it unfold. You know, just initial thoughts, initial reaction of that one, Rob.
Well, just like we said last week, where the question that was already answered, it was answered once again, and that is that Wilder can punch. And with the Wilder punch, the fight is not over until it's over. So from that angle, it was exciting for me. But the one thing that bothered me was the fact that he needed that punch. He had to come from behind, and he's the champion. It leaves some questions about Wilder as far as his future when he goes up to face like an Ortiz, when he goes up to face a Joshua, when he goes up to even face a lumbering Tyson Fury.
Yep.
How is he going to handle those guys as opposed to a guy like Washington? Washington is Washington, but they're they, and Washington is Washington.
And the uniqueness, too, even early on in that fight, and we're hoping to track down Mark Breeland, who trains Deontay Wilder, and get his thoughts on the fight itself and the adjustments they had to make, because I thought going into this fight early on, when you looked at Gerald Washington, he's taller, he's a little more rangier. I thought he would have to try to go to the body, chop the lumber, if you will, chop the tree down. We saw him establish that jab a little bit through 3 rounds, and he did. I don't know if it was more or less. Look, we know that Deontay Wilder is historically he's a slow starter. We know that, so he's given up a couple rounds. But the first 3, I don't know if it was the hand, I don't know if it was the bicep, the right hand. We saw later on it seemed fully healthy, but I don't want to call it frustration, tentative as well. And Washington showed a couple different things. Now, you go up against a hard puncher, whether it's, we talked about Joshua, whether it's Parker, whether it's Ortiz. I mean, again, I think Wilder can get away with a lot of things. He can make up for his lack of talent because he's got that power in that right hand.
Well, he has that power in his right hand, but not only do we have that power, but he believes in that power. So he could be losing the fight, but just as long as he's still trying to land that punch. As we were talking earlier before we got on the air, what's going to happen with a fighter like Wilder who believes so much in his punch when he actually hits somebody who can take his punch? A lot of fighters who are able to knock out guys with that punch, it's good for a moment.
Right.
But at the same time, when you run into that one guy that's going to take your punch, a lot of fighters don't have a plan B.
Yep.
Because they're so used to guys folding. And he's melted a lot of guys in the heavyweight division. But let's face it, they weren't the cream of the crop as far as the heavyweight division. So, the cream of the crop, it's rising right now.
Well, he said that he wants to take on Parker, and Parker's 22-0. He's got knockout power, 18 knockouts. First, he's got to obviously try to retain his title against a mandatory challenger in Huey Fury, Tyson Fury's brother, Huey Fury. But then, again, there's also some talk, too, about some other opponents. I thought was interesting is that the WBC is going to mandate, they order now a mandated defense for Wilder, as well as a heavyweight champ, light heavyweight champ, Adonis Stevenson. So if there was talk about maybe Wilder, who was eventually going to take on Stavern and Povetkin, but we know what transpired with that, with the banned substance. You put that on the back burner. If you look at Parker, okay, if they want to go all in for a showdown against Wilder, again, you might have to now put that on the back burner. So you also got to look at when these guys are fighting in April and fighting in May. I mean, if anything, you'll probably see Deontay Wilder again probably in the fall. But it's just a question of, how everything can kind of play out.
Well, and that's not necessarily a good thing because he's had these postponements,
yes.
He's had these delays. That doesn't really set well on the fighter, especially a fighter who's actually in a stage of development. It really doesn't set well for that. So basically, he has to get in that ring, and I think they're ironing it out. But at the same time, there will be a delay, but will that set well with his career as he goes on? Because he's gonna, like I said, it's inevitable that he's going to face some guys.
Yeah,
that,
Joshua fights
with a heartbeat.
Klitschko, but that's not in April. So again, you figure they fight in April. They're not fighting again over the summer. You know, they're not. They're probably going to have to wait till fall, or potentially maybe close out the year with a fight.
I don't anticipate him. I never anticipated him fighting one of those guys until at least the end of the year. So but he still has to stay active, especially when, like I said, let's face it, he's even though he's a WBC heavyweight champion,
he's a flawed champion.
But he's young, and I think he could be developed. But there's a lot of things with him that needs development. I mean, yes, he knocked the guy out, but let's face it. I mean, he's been talked about during the week in the sense of how he knocked him out. Not only from the right hand, that's a good thing, kudos, but everything that came afterwards.
Right.
You know, those punches weren't from...
It was inevitable. I had no issue with the stoppage.
No, I don't mean that. I'm talking about the quality of punches that Wilder threw after he got his opponent hurt. It wasn't punches thrown by a person that this is a heavyweight champion,
right?
You know, and that's the thing that I think that needs to be kind of ironed out. But I think that it can be ironed out because I think he's young, but he has to be in that ring in order to let his development, continue to take place.
But how about a fighter in Ortiz who's got power? He's a southpaw. He can be a little tricky. You know, you mentioned he's a guy. He's almost like a bull. If it's almost like a question of who's left. I mean, you've got the notable guys, but again, you're just going to get him another stay busy fight. Again, to me, that's not going to help him.
No, it's not going to help him, and it hasn't helped him thus far. That's the reason why he looked the way that he looked on Saturday. He needs to get in that ring. You know, anybody that's outside the ring, ring rust sets in. So you get ring rust, plus he had the injury,
yes,
and also the quality of opposition that he's fighting. It still is not a setup for him when he finally does face like a Joshua, or if he faces a Ortiz. And I'm going to continue to put Klitschko's name in there because yes, he's older and what have you, but I'm still not ready to put him out the pasture just yet. I mean, I don't think he's what he used to be, but I think he's still enough. This guy has the most defenses, second to Joe Louis. And like I said, when he lost to Tyson Fury, a guy whose stature would give anybody problems. So, I'm using that, I guess, sort of as grabbing straws for a Klitschko. But right now, I'm not sure. I'm not putting Klitschko outside of the same category of these young lions right now. They're young lions. Joshua's a young lion, but thus far, he's sort of been like a lion that's been in a zoo as opposed to a lion that's been in the wild. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm saying as far as when he goes in there, when he fights Klitschko, that's when he's going to really be in the jungle.
Yeah. And Ortiz only fought one time in December. So if anything, if he fights again in the fall, you're almost looking at 6, 7, 8 months of inactivity. As far as one of the other bouts that stood out, Jared Hurd against a pretty good fighter in Tony Harrison, takes care of him, TKO in the 9th round. That was slated for 12, but you just saw, Jared Hurd, for people that aren't familiar with him, some of those boxers, Gary Williams does a great job with Boxing Along the Beltway. It's a great website. He covers a lot of those guys along the Beltway, him and Juan Marshall. For those who haven't had a chance to really look at Jared Hurd, did a lot of stuff with Keystone Boxing. He gets the vacant IBF super welterweight title. He's well-rounded. He's talented. He's got power, and he knows how to finish off an opponent. That's, to me, the most impressive thing with this young man.
Well, and he definitely finished him off this weekend.
Tony Harrison's a tough fighter. He's a very tough fighter.
Tough fighter, and you saw that he's not necessarily a pushover because he was doing a great job until he got caught. But that's the whole thing with boxing, especially with a fighter who's known for his punching power. You can't really slack off one single bit in a fight. And as he was getting tired, he had, I guess, to a certain degree, he had no other choice but to kind of slack off because his defense became a lot less. And what happened is what happened, and we have a new junior middleweight champion.
Now he's racked up a couple of TKOs, I think like 5 or 6 in a row. But again, I know sometimes you do look at the level of opponent. Frank Galarza is a very good fighter out of New York. I think that was his first or second loss that he suffered. Jeff Lynch, 5 under his belt. He's also an MMA / professional boxer. Eric Mitchell, I would think a club level guy, but then you got Oscar Molina as well. You throw them into the mix. So, to take on a Tony Harrison who comes in with a 24-1 record. He's got knockout power. He's fought some steady opponents as well. To me, that's a nice little feather in the cap for this young man going forward.
No, it's a definite feather in the cap, and as time go on, if he's looking for unifications fights, he has decent champions in his wake, if you will, and he has a chance to make a name for himself. So, but we'll see just how his career progresses as we go along. Congratulations to him, though.
Yeah, he's a good-looking young fighter going forward. All right, 10 past 7 o'clock hour Eastern time. Again, this is a Wednesday edition of Double Jab Boxing Podcast, powered by the Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame. Always remember the inaugural induction ceremony. It's coming up in May. That weekend and Memorial Day, just really keeping with the lineage of great Atlantic City boxing, that rich tradition. We'll give you a ton of information. You can certainly go on the website, acbhof.com. You can reserve your room today. Tickets, everything. Just the class is going to be outstanding. You got the rough carpet, you got the rooftop cocktail kickoff, the fight fan experience, the parade as well, and then, of course, the induction ceremony on that Sunday. So you get a lot of good stuff with that weekend as well. All right, so on the other side, we'll talk a little more about what transpired over the weekend. We're hoping to catch up with Mark Breeland to get his thoughts on Wilder's win, and then we will really start to dissect Thurman and Garcia, which has the makings to be a great fight this Saturday in Brooklyn, New York. All right, so we'll step aside. We'll come back on the other side.